Today, I'm going to be going over some Marvel Legends that I found at Ross. But with that said, let's jump right into it. This time, we're kicking off the Ross collection with Speedball, and I don't really have much to say about him. There's a reason why he's at Ross. But starting off with the things that I do like, I really like the patterns that are on his boots, his belt piece, his neck, and also his arms. It actually looks really nice, and at least for me, I actually got ones that were pretty clear. Also, I really like his hair sculpt. I think this hair sculpt is really unique. I also like the goggles. I like that you can see his eyes underneath. That's pretty cool. Also, the blue for him is really cool, and a lot of people say that this figure is really good for an Invincible custom. But yeah, that's about it for what I have to say about him that's good, because he could have came with so much more. Next up, we have Madam Hydra and Quake / Maria Hill. So starting off with Madam Hydra, if you've seen my short on it, you already know that I find this figure really disappointing. I mean, of course, why is she on this old body mold when there's literally a new body mold that they put for the wave? I mean, why not just give her use the new body? It would have been perfect. All you had to do was paint it green and just it's such a disappointment. But anyways, I did take the head sculpt and put it on a different body, so she looks much better on my custom version of Madam Hydra. And also, I did take off her belt piece here as well. But moving on to Quake / Maria Hill, this is a figure that I was really surprised to see at Ross, because considering it's meant to be an army builder, I'm really surprised that people didn't pick up more of her and that it's at Ross in the first place. I really like the Maria Hill head sculpt though. I kind of wish she came with a more neutral expression, but I do think it looks really good. She looks like she's giving orders and she's a little bit agitated. And although I'm not a big fan of the gun that they've been giving Marvel Legends recently, I do think that this one's okay for the most part. And of course for Quake, I do think that the Quake head is actually done very well. Oops, Madam Hydra can't stand. Well, you know what? She can't stand anyway, so. Anyways, but the Quake head sculpt, I think is actually done very well. Her head is a lot more neutral, so I think it works a lot better. I really don't like that when you bend her hands back here, you can see the joints here. And I wish she came with fist hands. I'm not sure why they didn't give her punching hands in the first place. And I wish that this was painted to be more of a glossy silver. But other than that, I'm actually pretty satisfied with this figure. I think it's pretty cool, and I wish that we would get more army builders. Up next, we have the Model 70 Iron Man armor. Starting off with things that I really like the paneling that's on his forearms here all the way down to his fingers. And this paneling goes all over the figure. I like that it goes down onto the legs and even on the back here as well. And I also like that it goes all the way up to his stomach. And they even went to the effort of putting it on his underarm. And also a little bit of it is also present on the upper torso as well. Another thing I really like is the fact that he could look up very well. Now, he does have a standard neck hinge. However, he also comes with a ball joint neck at the bottom. So he can look a lot better than a lot of other Iron Man figures. And you can still get a good amount of tilt and also leaning forward with the Iron Man head as well. Another thing I really like is that they actually put some detail onto the bottom of his feet. Instead of just being ports here, they actually sculpted the bottom here. And also, because this Iron Man comes with effects, you can actually port them into the bottom of the feet. If you're able to get this Iron Man into a flight pose, he looks really cool. And another thing that goes with this flight pose too are these theme effects here. I believe this and also the blast effects originate from the Ironheart figure, but I really like these new designs that they're going for effects, especially the steam effect here. But I think it looks really good, especially if you could get it in some poses where it'll look like steam's coming off of his jet propulsions, or even just putting steam on the figure itself. But now that I've gone over that, I want to go over something that I feel like this figure could have done so much better. And that's going to be the gold. I feel like the gold on the figure is just subpar. Say for instance here, the modular Iron Man armor, the gold looks amazing here. I love the painted gold. It just pops out a lot more and it just looks so much more vibrant and it looks sturdy like it's metal. So I feel like choosing to have these only as molded gold plastic just doesn't look as well. And if you see the art that they provided for the back of the packaging, the Alex Ross art, it looks amazing. Look at that. Look at the gold and look at the shadows on it. It looks amazing. Now, I know you can't exactly represent how some characters will look in images and comics sometimes, but I feel like just painting it gold would have made it work that much better and would have made it look amazing. Next up, we have the retro-carded Lady Loki. Now, starting off with positives, I have to say that I'm actually pretty surprised by this figure. I really like the design on her chest, her upper arms, and also her thighs here, where it has that scaly look to it. I wish it would have continued all the way to the back over here and on the sides, but from the front, it looks really good. I really like the green that they went with, almost like a an emerald color. And another thing I like is the fact that they actually made her face very good. The sculpt and the paint on it is spot on, and I have yet to run into any that have really bad paint or QC issues, although I just picked up one. But the ones I've been seeing at my Ross lately haven't looked half bad either. Another thing I really like is their crown. The crown is actually sculpted very well. My only issue is that it's not painted. I think if it was painted like the ornaments here, or even the little button pieces or ornament pieces on the belt, it would actually look a lot better. Another thing too is that the ornaments themselves are actually done pretty decently. I actually think they look kind of nice, although I do think that the paint could use a little QC and could be a lot better sometimes. But from positives, now I'll go into negatives. So this figure does have a lot of negatives. First off, I mean, single jointed elbows. That kind of sucks. Oh, and another positive that I forgot to mention is the fact that she actually has bicep swivel, which I will give that a plus because actually, even if it's just single jointed like this, I would rather have them have bicep swivel than just having it completely stiff and only having rotation at the elbows here like this. So that is another positive that I forgot to mention. But continuing on with my negatives, though, one thing I find is really funny is the fact that for her spell casting or her open hand here, you can see that they painted on the sleeve on the joint piece right here, and it does look pretty good. However, they really just didn't care with the punching hands because it's not there at all. With a quick comparison, look at it again. You can see they really did just would it really have been that big of a difference just to put a little paint here? I don't know. I just think that's one thing that's kind of confusing and just kind of disappointing about this figure. Another thing is that I really don't like that they did this. I believe they did this with the retrocarded Rogue however many years ago. I really don't like that these knee pads right here are just floating up like this. I'd rather have them just sculpted into place. I think it would look a lot better. Most likely, if they're up here, just sculpted, they will look a lot better. I believe down here, while it might make a little bit more sense, it might cause a lot of issues with articulation. So I'd rather them just have it stuck all the way up here. And another big negative is the fact that this figure is basically meant to do no poses because she can't raise her arms with this cape here. She can raise her arms about this much, but can't go any higher. So you'd have to remove the cape here. And the cape itself is pretty stiff because of the collar piece here with the fur. And even when you take it out here, you can still see that there's a big gap right there, so it looks really weird. But at least she could get her arms all the way up now. So yeah, this figure is kind of a disappointment, but honestly a disappointment that I kind of knew going in already. And in case you're wondering, well, why'd you get this figure then? Yeah, I was wondering that myself at one point. But, you know, I was about to leave it behind until I realized that I could actually use this to help make another custom Madam Hydra. Because if you've seen my short already, I've already made a custom Madam Hydra, but I think this one might help to make a more classic look with a couple modifications, especially because wow, I've looked at this figure so many times and I'm disappointed by it every time I look at it. I mean, would it have been so difficult just to use a modified version of this? Like you could have just made look this right here, the bicep could have just been the skin color, and then all this could have just been green. Was it really that big a deal? Like I feel like that's something they could have done fairly well. But oh well. Leave it to customizing then. Up next, we'll be taking a look at Darwin from the Bonebreaker Build-A-Figure wave. And starting off, I don't have that much to say about this figure, but I will say that I actually like the head sculpt. I think the head sculpt looks pretty good and it captures the look of Darwin with his abnormal head sculpt and his pale white eyes. However, I do think that adding a little bit of a wash or a shading to maybe his cheekbones here and also his eyebrows would have actually added a little bit more, but overall, I still think that the head sculpt is very good. But for the rest of the figure, I just personally feel like the Pizza Spider-Man mold is kind of outdated and wasn't quite right for him. I think that in the sense of him being skinny, I think it actually works. However, I would have actually been really interested to see them maybe use a new mold for Darwin and maybe come up with a new pinless version of a skinny body for other figures. I think that would have worked out really well and been really cool. He also came with an additional pair of hands that were open. So yeah, overall, I don't have much to say about this figure, but I think the head sculpt is decent. And if you're looking for a Darwin figure, it's not too bad, but at the same time, it could have been much improved. Up next, we have Havoc from the Bonebreaker Build-A-Figure wave. And while I don't have too much to say about this figure, what I do have to say is mostly positive. Starting off with the head sculpt. I really like that they sculpted the bands on the top of his head. However, my only real complaint is that I wish they were silver instead of just being gray molded plastic. I think silver would have made it pop a lot more, and the gray just makes it look very, very dull. But continuing on with the head sculpt, I actually really like how they painted his eyes and his eyebrows. I think they did a really solid job on that. An additional thing is that his chest symbol actually looks really good. I like that it has the glowing effect here that they painted on, and they did a solid job on that. Another thing I really like is his effects right here for his arms. I think they look really good, and I'm not too sure if they're unique to Havoc or if we've seen these effects before, but I think they look really good. And additionally, he did come with another accessory, which was a bigger version of this effect that was meant to be placed on his back. But the only real complaint I really have about this figure, other than, well, the silver that should have been painted on here, is the fact that his effects here don't stay up. And that kind of annoys me because I like to have my figures, especially with effects, posed in a certain way sometimes. And these just don't pose very well, and they just wobble all over the place on his arms and his wrist. As you can see here, if I was to flick this, yeah, it just spins in a circle like that. So I do think that's a little disappointing. I wish there was a better way to fit it on. But overall, I think that it's a pretty okay figure, or a decent figure at most. But for a Ross find, it was pretty good. Up next, we have Siren from the Bonebreaker Build-A-Figure wave. Starting off with the head sculpt, I think that the face sculpt is done very well. It's painted very nice and it looks good. That also goes for the hair. I think the hair looks really cool as well. My only real complaint is that I wish there was some dry brushing or maybe a wash put on the hair a little bit more so you could see it a little bit more. However, I will say that in person, it does look better than on camera here. As you see, it looks a little bright on camera. Another thing I'll add is that I like that she's on the modern body. I believe this is using the same arms and the same legs, although the torso may be different as Quake. So she does have her double jointed elbows here, which I really like, and also have to note that this is something they could have just done for Madam Hydra. I mean, it wasn't that hard, was it? I mean, look at this. It's basically exactly what Madam Hydra should have been. Just adding some green onto it and just keep the overall body. And also it's pinless, which I appreciate very much. Oh yeah, Andy, as you can tell here, I did rip this side of the wings here, which is very disappointing for me. However, it was on my part because I was tugging on it a little too much when I was trying to remove the hands. So I will say that be careful if when you're removing the hands so you don't tear up the wings here. But I do like that they actually chose to make a fabric for this and cloth, so that way it's not just, just like standard plastic wings. So I will say that I appreciate Hasbro for doing that. The only other things I really have to know about this figure is that I wish she came with the alternative screaming head because she is supposed to be Siren, so she should have that power of screaming. So I'm kind of confused why they didn't give her extra screaming head or even an effect for that screaming head. I think that would have been really cool and made this figure even better. Up next, we'll be taking a look at Vulcan. So starting off with positives, I want to say that I think they actually did the head sculpt very well on here. Now, this Vulcan figure I did not get from Ross. I actually got it from a Target when it was on sale. However, he is popping up a lot more at Ross's now. But going back to the head sculpt, I actually think they did a pretty good job on it overall. I like the hair sculpt, and I think that if they gave him an alternate head with his eyes as normal rather than being powered, I would like that a lot more. But I do appreciate the fact that they gave us a powered up head. And I wish he came with effects as well. But moving on to the rest of the body, I do like that he's pinless though. I like that Hasbro's using more of their new technology, especially because this figure is going to be the standard buck for most figures now. And I also appreciate the fact that they actually sculpted him pretty decently. You can see here they sculpted all of his muscles on his abs and even on his arms as well. And I think they did a pretty good job on that. However, one thing that I really don't like about this figure is that he has really weird two-tone plastic. It might be a little bit more difficult to tell on camera here, but the red here for the thighs and the legs, and for that the rest of the body is different from the knee, which kind of bothers me because I'd prefer for it to be more seamless looking and not have a little bit of a color difference. I think it would look a lot better if there wasn't that much of a big difference to it. Furthermore, I wish his butterfly joints worked like they were supposed to, or at least how I intended them and thought they were going to work. Because while you can move the arms back here, there are several YouTube videos talking about it, and he can't pull his arms all the way back. And the main reason is because Hasbro actually uses a method with the arms to where the peg is a little bit longer than it needs to be to port into the butterfly joint itself. And there have been some videos on YouTube where people actually clip the extra part of the joint so that way he can use his butterfly joints much better. And that's what I intend to do for this figure and also for other figures that come with the Vulcan body mold from now on. But it's kind of a shame that we have to do that because I feel like that's something that Hasbro could have fixed. And I think it would actually be really cool if they were to go back and slightly rework it so that way we could still use the Vulcan body mold, but have the butterfly joints work as intended now. The other issue is that he does have sculpted gloves on here, so for figures that won't really have gloves, it's going to pose a weird issue because there'll be some layering on top of it. And although it might not be as noticeable, I think that it could still pose to be a weird issue if Hasbro uses it for specific figures. On certain figures, it might look okay, but other figures, I think it'll just weirdly pop out more. The other thing is that, at least from my figure, his feet don't articulate as well as I thought they would. As you can see here, it's a little bit of a struggle, and it's not as smooth to articulate his feet as most figures, and I'm not sure why that is. It could be just from my figure, and maybe I just need to heat him up again to articulate his feet, but it just feels a lot tougher to move his feet than it is for most Marvel Legends. So those are some of my gripes with this Vulcan figure. On one hand, I'm really happy to have this new body mold, and I like that it's pinless and that it's going to be the new standard buck because that Bucky cap mold was just outdated. So I'm really glad that they're updating that, but I feel like there's a couple things that they could do to improve it just by a little bit. Another thing is that I kind of feel like his torso is a little small. I'm not sure how to describe it. It just looks kind of off to me with his legs looking a little bit longer than what his body holds. But at the same time, I think that's just from my point of view that it looks kind of off. But in general, I still think that's a decent body mold and it is an update, but it could use a couple things to make it better. Next up, we'll be taking a look at Maggot. And while I don't know this character very well, the more I mess around with this figure, I actually like it a little bit more. Starting off with the head sculpt, you can see here that Hasbro did a pretty good job with this head sculpt. They give him this menacing smile and piercing orange eyes. And I also like the fact that he does have blue skin and a little bit of hair here, so he does stand out on my shelf. Another thing I really love is the fact that they actually textured his entire coat here. And although I think it could have been used with maybe some black wash to help show out more of the texture, I do think that it's still really cool that they went to the effort of completely sculpting it with some texture. My only real complaint with this figure is the fact that while he's pinless on his arms, he's not pinless when it comes to his knees down here. And I have heard people say that this is using the Hercules body mold. If that's true, I think this is actually a really good choice for it because he does look very menacing. Even without comparison, he has a really bulky look to him. But I think that does help the fact that he does have these shoulder pads here. And unlike most figures, which I'm surprised about because I thought Hasbro would have done this, is that his shoulder pads are actually connected to his coat rather than on the inside of the shoulders here. So when you rotate his arms, it does get stuck and prevent some movement. I just think that was odd because lately, from what I've noticed, Hasbro's actually done it where they put it inside of the shoulder piece so that way you could actually articulate it. But that's besides the point because I think the articulation on this guy is still pretty good. The pinless arms look really nice and the double jointed elbows work pretty decently. And I think giving him these open hands is pretty cool too, especially so he could hold his maggots right here. And I did do a little bit of research and I found out that these maggots and also the description of the box also says that these maggots act as his digestive system, which I think is creepily awesome. Not to mention, I do really love the sculpt on these maggots right here too, or at least for his slugs. I think they look really cool and I like that it's an all unique sculpt. I like that you could kind of see the teeth here. However, I wish the teeth was painted a little bit so it would stand out more, but they look disgusting and they look awesome. I also like that instead of giving him two of the same, they give him one that you could put crawling on his shoulder here or positioning it in different areas, although it doesn't stick as well because, it doesn't wrap around as tightly. However, this one right here is more meant for the arms here, and I do like that it gives you a lot of different display options. You could have him holding it right here, or perhaps maybe even having your hand open and actually putting them like this as they're slithering around. I think it looks really cool and it gives a lot of options for displaying Maggot. So yeah, all in all, I would say that this figure is surprisingly pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of Maggot and I don't know that much about him, but if you're a fan of him, I'd say pick him up. He's actually pretty decent. Next up, we'll be taking a look at Sabertooth. And I want to start off by saying that over time, this figure has grown on me. Initially, I really didn't like this figure. I didn't like that he was a smaller size. I didn't like the oversized hands, and I didn't like his face. However, it's grown on me a little bit more over time, but I still have some issues with it. But jumping right into the figure, I think that for what it's worth, the head sculpt is actually done very well. I really like that they added a wash to his hair, so his hair really sticks out, and it looks really good. However, I wish that they extended the wash to the rest of his face as well, because in my opinion, his teeth kind of just blends in altogether, as well as the rest of his face. I feel like his eyebrows could have been, actually, if a wash on the eyebrows actually would have looked really good to show off more of his eyebrows. But I do think that the sculpt of the face is actually done pretty good. You can see there that they added a lot of wrinkles onto it or creases, and also they even sculpted an underbite. And the only thing that's missing is a wash. A wash actually would have applied it more to the face, and it would have made the face stand out even more. But moving on to the rest of the figure, they also added a wash onto the fur on his neck piece or shoulder piece here, as well as his forearms and lower legs, and I think that actually looks pretty good as well. But moving on to his hands, on one hand, I do like that the hands look monstrous. It has its fingerless gloves and his claws look amazing. I really like the look of it. It has that animalistic Sabertooth look to it. However, I just think that it seems a little out of scale compared to the rest of the body, especially because the figure is on the Grim Reaper body mold, which is an older body mold and a lot slimmer. So I think that giving him these big hands just looks kind of off. But I think that if you were to put it on a different Sabertooth figure, it would actually look really awesome. But continuing with the rest of the figure, he also has these, I guess you could say, not fingerless, but toeless boots or toeless socks or toeless leggings, maybe? I don't know how you would put it, but I actually like that they did this. The combination with the toeless, call them toeless boots, and the fingerless gloves actually looks really good together, and it makes them look a lot more monstrous and animalistic like Sabertooth is supposed to be. For comparison, I have the Apocalypse Build-A-Figure Wave Sabertooth. And this one is based on the art of Jim Lee, so it does have that more, I guess you could say, traditional, also slash modern Sabertooth design. But I would say that even though this is on the Hyperion body mold, which I have already stated in a short that I think is very outdated and should not be used anymore, I will say that it does add a lot more height to him. As you can see here, this Sabertooth is a lot smaller than this one here. And another thing is that because his body is meant to be more muscular, it gives him a lot more width compared to this Sabertooth here, who looks a lot thinner. But in general, I would say that the Bonebreaker Wave Sabertooth is still a decent figure. If you were to get him for his first appearance, I think it's not half bad. A lot of things could have been done to make it even better, but for what it's worth, I think it's pretty decent, especially at a Ross price. And lastly, we'll be taking a look at the Build-A-Figure himself, Bonebreaker. So starting off, I just want to say that I think for the most part, Hasbro did a really decent job on sculpting his head. I especially like the sculpting on his hair. However, I think that the face sculpt could have used a little bit more work. Removing the glasses here, I think he looks a little too cheerful and he looks almost like a baby. I believe it's probably the smoothness of the head as well as the shape of the head being super round. I think that kind of gives it that infant look to it. But if you keep the glasses down, it's not too bad. And I do think that the shape of his mouth, specifically the upper teeth here, is kind of odd. It almost looks like it's supposed to be his gum line rather than actual teeth. But moving on to the rest of the figure, the top half of his articulation is pretty decent overall. You can turn him 360 degrees around. However, I would recommend doing it slowly, as if you do it too fast, sometimes it will come off. However, I will say that it does make it easy for him to be removed from the little chassis piece here and easily placed back as well. Another thing is that his harness here does prevent him from bending forward a bit, although it still is possible, but I wouldn't recommend it because it would bend the harness piece here as well. His double jointed elbows, as you can see here, work pretty decently, and I think that sculpting part of the chest here is a little odd because sometimes it will harm the articulation sometimes, but it's not too big a deal to me at least. For his hands, he comes with a pair of fists and also a gripping hand. I have one of each on right now, but I appreciate the fact that they actually give him a pair of each so that way you can have different display options. Moving on to his gun, I think that his gun is actually pretty decent, although I would have wished for a more modern gun. I know that Hasbro is more akin to adding futuristic fake looking guns, but I think for this one, they added a pretty decent like silhouette of a realistic gun while also being futuristic as well. But I also appreciate the fact that Hasbro actually left an opening so you can actually port in effects here. And I think that does look pretty cool. I kind of wish that the figure or one of the other figures maybe came with an effect. That would have been cool, but I think as is, it's fine for the most part. Oh, and an additional thing, I wish that he did come with the alternate head. Maybe a neutral head would have been very nice. Starting on the take though, I will say that for the most part, the sculpting is very great on this guy. My only issue is that it's not painted. As you can see here on the side panelings, it's actually done very well with the rivets and the panels and even the damage here. It looks really great. But the only issue is the fact that it's not painted. How much more amazing would this guy look if there was black wash over the entire tank and there was some silver paint on the dents here? I think it would look awesome. Another thing is that I feel like it's a missed opportunity to give him an additional weapon here, because it looks like this is supposed to be a collapsible missile launcher here, or maybe it's not even a missile launcher. I could be wrong on that too. But going on with the rest of the figure for a sculpt, I like that they actually sculpted the barrel for the gun here. For his little turret, I like that they sculpted the vents right here, and as well as the front with the headlights here, and even these tubes and the different segments of the figure here. Actually, I'll remove the top half of him so we could get a better look. But getting really deep into it though, it looks really great. I love the rivets here and the slight damage that's been applied to the top panels here. And as you can see here too, even on the engine and also the exhaust pipes here, the sculpting is done very well. My only real complaint is that I think this should be flipped around, because if this is the exhaust pipes right here where the heat is coming out, it's going to be hitting Bonebreaker rather than going out. So I think that's one thing that's done really weird. Another thing is that I really like that they sculpted the wheels and the treads here for the tank. It looks really awesome. And as I was saying before, he's missing a little bit of articulation. And that articulation is the fact that these treads don't move. I think it would have sold this figure over the top if his treads would have been able to move, because they are a slightly lighter plastic. So I think even going a softer, more malleable plastic and allowing it to move would have just made this figure even more awesome. Another thing is that I like the fact that he actually has a compartment piece right here. I'm not too sure what it's for, but I have seen other people take his additional hands here and put it inside of this piece and then close it up for storage. So I do think that's cool. I like that that's a secret thing. Hasbro didn't have to include that, but I'm glad that they did. Unless this design was maybe taken from a comic, so this was part of the design, but the fact that it opens up and closes is really awesome. He also comes with these two barrels here, and while I do appreciate that these barrels are sculpted and they have some indentations and damage, I really don't think that they poured in that well. While they will stay there, I just think that they fall off a little bit too easy. As you can see here, I could just simply grab it off like this, and I think it makes it a little too easy for it to come off in general. But putting these back here, and sometimes it might take a while because they have the indentation here and a specific one that plugs in. But looking at this part of the figure here, I really like that they sculpted this here. They sculpted the hose, as you can see here. They sculpted even the top here with the rivets and different areas. And these panels look amazing right here. I just wish they were sculpted. And oddly enough, he has two ports right here. I'm not sure if this is meant for maybe other figures or characters to stand here as well. I think that's a cool addition though. And he also comes with this little console piece here, which of course sadly isn't painted, and even this little vent piece here. So all in all, I think if this Build-A-Figure was painted just a little bit more, he would be over the top and just be almost perfect. But in general, I think that as a Build-A-Figure, he's really awesome. And I would say that if you could find him at your Ross, because at all of my Rosses, I've been seeing this entire wave, so I did pick up this entire wave. I would say definitely pick it up to get Bonebreaker, especially if you're a Reavers fan, because I think that for what it is, this Build-A-Figure has potential. It has great potential, and executed, it's almost near perfect, I would say. It's near perfect. The only real things that's missing is the movement of the treads and some more paint. And maybe an alternate head sculpt, of course. But other than that, I think this figure is really cool and really great. I would love to customize this thing one of these days when I have the time. And I think he's going to look awesome on my shelf for my Reavers squadron. Although, my only issue now is trying to get space for this guy. All in all, yeah, this build figure is awesome. And with that being said, those are my Marvel Legends finds at Ross. Overall, I think it was a decent haul. I didn't love every single figure I found, but I ended up liking a lot more of them than I thought I would. And even though Bonebreaker is a figure that I do have some gripes with, overall, I'm really glad that I got him. But with that said, I've been Figuristic Productions. I hope you enjoyed, I thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.